Welcome to NETINT's Voices in Video. Today's episode is about VR and Multiview, a technology that lets your viewers choose among different available feeds from the same or different events and create their own immersive viewing experience. We're talking today with Rob Koenen, founder and chief business officer of Tiledmedia, which develops and supplies VR and Multiview technologies to publishers like Sky Sports, BT Sports, and LG U+. If Rob's name sounds familiar, it should. Rob has worked with codecs going back to the start of H.264 when he founded and served as the president of the MPEG Industry Forum. He also founded and served as the first president of the VR Industry Forum and has initiated and guided work in MPEG-I, the standard for immersive media in MPEG. Rob, you're a busy guy. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure. Thank you, John, for having us.
So why don't you walk us through your background real quickly? Take us through your education, take us through your job history, and end up in Tiledmedia.
I don't want to make it too long, but I started as in electrical engineering and studied information theory. Actually, a little bit of expert systems, things that are coming back now in the form of AI. But and my first real job was at KPN, which is a Dutch incumbent telco. I'm doing a lot video coding research, basically image communication research. I then moved to Intertrust in the US, Silicon Valley, where I worked on DRM systems. Then I was back to the Netherlands, where I worked for TNO, which is a largest national research institute, also doing media research again. And then in 2016, we tried we showed some of the technology we had developed in TNO at IBC. It was called tiled streaming, and we applied it to VR, which was a hype at that point. And long story short, we decided to set up our own company, spin it out of TNO, and founded Tiledmedia to provide tiled streaming services for virtual reality.
What's the high-level vision for the company?
The vision is that we want to have the most advanced streaming in the world. We think we have the most advanced audiovisual player in the world. It's all founded on tiled streaming, which means that we see video as composed of a number of tiles and we get to talk about this, I hope, a little bit, but all of these tiles can together make up a single video, which could be a VR video of insane resolution, or it could be the multiview that we will get to talk about, where we compose what the customer sees of all sorts of tiny little elements. And we since this is a technical podcast, we push them all through a single decoder.
So tell us about VR, tell us about Multiview.
VR was a huge promise 7 years ago. It's still a promise. It's not grown as fast as everybody would have hoped, including us. But it's healthy and alive, and we've done amazing things in VR. Like we've done the Premier League with two customers. We still do with Sky. Sky has a couple of Premier League football matches every week, and it's amazing. It's an amazing user experience. But VR video. So VR is a lot of things. We focus on VR video. It's still, I would say, is nascent. I think it's the bridge from making video something for gamers to making VR something for a larger audience. But it's slowly growing. We're doing interesting projects.
How did that evolve into Multiview?
Well, by the same token, we saw that VR wasn't growing as fast as we had always hoped, and we saw the basis of our tiled streaming technology actually wasn't VR until we decided to apply it to VR. So we went back to the basics and said, there's more that we can do with this. And for one thing, we saw video consumption change. We saw the need for increasing interactivity, engagement. And we decided to build a Multiview product, which was about 2 years ago, I think. And it's now about ready. It has taken a bit of time, but it's interesting, and it was kind of prescient, because if you see what's going out now in the market, Apple is starting to do Multiview, YouTube is starting to do Multiview, so it seems the timing is right.
Why don't you show us what Multiview is, what it looks like?
Yes, I will need to do something that's slightly complicated, which is move the camera to my iPad. Screen sharing doesn't work for this, so I'm trying to do it on a real iPad. So this is streaming video. You see one stream here. And what we have here is like we call it a 25 item multi-view clip or experience. The first thing you can see is that we've got all these moving thumbnails. They're not stills, they're actually moving. I can switch to any of these immediately. And this is actually streaming, right? It's not a demo, it streams from our CDN account. But I can do other interesting things, is like drag in. I can change by clicking in this thumbnail, I'll change the main videos. And what actually happens here is interesting also, because it actually changes what is being retrieved from the network. But I can go a little bit overboard. I can add things. So you could imagine that these are cameras in a race or in a golf event. And this is kind of a busy background, so let me give it a bit of a simpler background. But there's a lot of flexibility here. You can do a grid. You can just, this could be like the channels you normally watch. This is what I wanted to show you. I think this gives an impression of what it does, right?
The early adapters, are they doing this for multiple views of a single event, or are they doing that to enable different views for different events? What's the application?
So we're just rolling this out, but the most interest right now is from people that have multi cameras. So it's like there's these events. It could be racing, it could be, like I mentioned, golf, it could be athletics, where there's stuff happening. The director is forced to make a choice, but there's stuff happening elsewhere. You may have a favorite athlete. You want to follow them. You want to be able to switch to them. But mostly also you want to be able to, you don't want to lose the story that the director tells you, because they have amazing tools at their fingertips to tell stories. But sometimes you just have your favorite athlete that the director isn't following, and you want to keep track of them. And this is where the technology shines. The other example where we see this deployed by other parties is like NFL. It's called Game Day, I think, Sunday Ticket, where with YouTube video you can get like 4 matches in a certain fixed configuration in a grid. But there's also a case where you want to watch multiple matches at the same time. You could imagine a tennis tournament. But the most interest that we are seeing right now is for these events that inherently have a number of cameras, a number of views, and the director just can't show you everything that you might want to see.
What were we looking at? Give us the, break the technology down into encoder, streaming, and player side of all that.
I will show the ways that this could be done in principle, and then the way that we do it. There's a couple of approaches to this. And the first is many encodes, which means basically you encode all the possible permutations. And YouTube does something like this. But if you have take an event like Formula One, right? Formula One already broadcasts cockpit cameras. They have like 24 feeds. You can see the amount of permutations and combinations is going to be completely insane.
The viewer chooses a feed and they're stuck with that, so they can't customize.
Right now, they can choose. In that app, they can choose either a cockpit camera or they can choose the director cut. They can't choose both at the same time. If you wanted to do to use this approach, the many encodes approach, it would be completely impossible. Another approach is what we call the many decoders approach. So you encode all of the videos individually at a number of different ABR levels and resolutions. And then you use the fact that most devices have more than one decoder available. And not all, but most. So, but and that's precisely the issue with this approach, is that it's hard to do cross-device. You have to adapt to all of the individual devices. Sometimes you have to use software decoding, which quickly eats up battery. And what's also an issue is that syncing is a complete nightmare to keep all of these decoders in sync. And also ABR, there's the ABR fighting between these all of these different decoders. So you see them switch up and down in quality level. So that's also not a very good approach.
Who's using this approach? So you mentioned YouTube is using the first approach. Who's using? I know Apple's in the space. What are they doing?
Apple is doing this indeed. That's our understanding, and that's why it's only working on Apple devices. And then yet another approach is cloud edge processing, which means basically you do the interaction on a server, and it requires a separate server per customer. So if you've got an event that attracts millions of users, this is insanely expensive. So it's very hard to scale. And depending on how you do it, the interaction is slow. I know there are ways to speeding that up, but even if you can make it fast enough, then still it's very, very, very difficult to scale. So then obviously this sets it up for our approach, which we call Mosaic Multiview. And basically this uses this tiled encoding, or actually it uses tiled decoding. And what happens here is that we take all the videos in the resolution that they are on the screen, and then we create a single frame for it, which goes through the single hardware decoder on the device. And there's some logic in the player that the player knows the resolution that's on the screen, so it only retrieves it at the resolution that it's on the screen. There's no bandwidth being wasted. And the nice thing about this is that the interaction is completely local. Everything you saw me do on that screen just now is local composition with videos that are being decoded. But as soon as I switch something, it actually switches the retrieval. It's all HTTP streaming. So it actually switches what's being retrieved from the CDN. I think in a nutshell, that's it.
Let's keep this up just for the sake of the discussion. So what's this look like on the encoding side? So I'm bringing in this case, I guess 5 separate streams. I'm creating 5 separate encoding ladders. Is that correct?
Yeah. So in 5, it actually, so this goes up to 10. It is as many cameras as you get in, you will have encoding ladders being encoded and being written to a CDN origin server. And all of these things, the encoding side entails, there's a few modifications in the encoding that will allow us to do the merging client side of the bit stream. So what we're actually doing is retrieving snippets of bit streams and then rewriting these snippets into a single bit stream. It's almost like you're recombining DNA, and you're feeding that single bit stream through the hardware decoder in the device, which is why it's not just bandwidth efficient, it's also power efficient.
So it feels like you're doing a lot of hard work in the player. I mean, what are the CPU requirements for making this happen?
It's not that bad. There is hard work. It's all relative in the sense what's going on in a player. There's a module that defines the strategy that determines what videos to retrieve at what bit rates and at what resolutions. And then there's a little bit of bit stream rewriting going on, but that's not all that CPU intensive. And then the decoding itself again uses the hardware decoder in the device, so it's not a software process. It's not that bad. We've been doing we've done this with a customer in India, and there's some pretty low-end devices there, and we've done this for VR, and it's without much of a problem.
What's the installed base of available decoders for this? If I'm a publisher and I want to implement this, take me through. I guess I care about smart TVs, I care about mobile, I care about computer playback. Where does this work? Where doesn't it work?
This relies on the tiling capabilities of HEVC or H.265. So, but H.265 is pretty universally deployed in certainly in mobile devices, and also in TVs and set-top boxes, etc. And interesting for us, it's starting to be pretty universally deployed in web browsers even. So we've never been able to address web, but we're now planning to have a web player SDK available at the end of the year, which will be a huge step for us. It's very interesting. But HEVC H.265 is from my perspective is universally deployed, which is amazing, because I wouldn't have been able to build my business without it.
So I need HEVC decode. Is that hardware, software, either?
It could be either, but in this case, we always end up using a hardware encoder because it's so universally available.
So what's this look like on a smart TV? I mean, is it HTML5 so it just works, or do I need a driver or some kind of player for each TV set?
Yeah, we haven't done a lot of smart TV things yet, and it does require a fairly deep level of integration with the platform. So we're taking them one at a time. But as you suggest, with HEVC and decoder becoming available in browsers, that also opens up new avenues to smart TV platforms. But as far as set-top boxes go, there's a lot of Android out there now, which we have deployed to. It's very straightforward, I would say. Not just pretty, it's very straightforward.
Do you have any use cases of this actually working in the field, or actually, trials or anything you can talk about, even if you don't identify the publisher?
We've done interesting tests. I have to be really careful now. Okay. With some 20 feeds live, with something that could really benefit from multiple cameras, and it worked like without a hitch. It was really encouraging, and I hope to be able to deploy it soon and then be able to talk about it.
What does the player side look like? Because if I'm a publisher, if I'm Sunday night TV, I guess I'm assuming that people are watching their TV for their main feed. So maybe TVs aren't as important as I think they are. But look at I guess the US Open is top of mind today because it's in process.
People see it as a second screen device. But what I've also done, what we have shown, is casting. It works really nicely, because the good thing about, if you want to do interactive video, there's nothing like a mobile device to do the interaction. A TV is very hard to seamlessly interact with, right? The thing I just did, by dragging around videos, putting them in my favorite spot, enlarging them, shrinking them, it's very, very hard to do with remote control, even if you have like an LG like smart remote. But what does work is casting, Chromecasting or AirPlay, and it works really nicely. And obviously, the thing I showed with the grid is more amenable to interaction on TV sets, where you just select and click and enlarge and maybe have a few picture-in-pictures available in fixed positions.
So what's this look like if I'm the publisher? You're going back to the tennis tournament. I'm typically, for television, I'm integrating all my cameras into a single feed. So at some point, I guess I need to create different feeds and feed them through different encoders. Take me from there.
Yeah, every event that we have done, be it Multiview or VR, basically it uses the same pattern. People do a mezzanine encode of their camera or their feed. They use SRT to send it to our cloud platform. We do the transcoding, and we egress it to their CDN origin server. And it's very straightforward. It's a very standard workflow. It's very straightforward. When we did this with the event I was talking about, it's only a matter of hours. Our partner made the streams available in AWS. We picked them up, and we were up and running. So as long as you have the individual camera feeds available, and many organizations do, it's very straightforward.
And it's all HEVC encode. What's it look like in the cloud? Are you using software or hardware transcoders in the cloud?
We're using software in the cloud. It's interesting. Let me take the example of we did the Beijing Games, and we did 8K VR 180, which is mind-boggling resolution. It was higher than any current headset can display. In this case, we had, let me get this correct. We had 2 cameras, and we had, so we do, for VR, we do a number of different GOP versions because we need to be able to switch on every single tile. Now we had 1 camera, we had 3 GOP versions, short, intermediate, and long, and then we had ABR levels. So in the end, there is 1 single manager that manages 900, literally 900 parallel HEVC encodes.
Wow.
And it spawns them, waits for them to complete, then collects the results, does clever packaging, because we do some clever packaging scheme. If you have your headset here, if you have your headset and you move around, you will retrieve different tiles from the sphere. So you have to be really quick. So we do clever packaging so that adjacent tiles are likely to be available at the CDN edge cache if you move around. But to answer your question, there's just an enormous amount of tiny encoders, tiles. I could be 480 by 480 or 640 by 640, or maybe even a bit larger. Just churning away at doing encodes, and sometimes, yeah, and then packaging it up and then writing it to a CDN origin server.
And then the player, the playback side is a player that they would download and install, or? Yes.
So the player would have our SDK player, which is pretty much a complete AV player at the heart of an application that provides a nice user experience. And our AV player is at the heart of it. And that handles everything like which tiles do I need to retrieve, all the rewriting. And interestingly, in the case of Multiview, you can do some very interesting ABR strategies, like my bandwidth is dropping. What you could do with normal video, you can only drop the quality of the entire video, right? Here you could say, okay, bandwidth is too low, I'll prioritize the main feed. Or maybe I should use stills for the thumbnails now. Let me not retrieve the thumbnails. You could do all sorts of clever strategies now. It opens up a whole world of new ABR research almost.
And you're saying that this is all HEVC at this point?
It's all, yes, it's all HEVC, correct.
Because it relies on the tiled structure you talked about. Is that going through in VVC as well? Is that going to be, I guess, kept alive, or is it?
VVC is even easier to implement this if you use VVC. It'll be a long while before it's as widely deployed as HEVC, but it's
yeah, no question.
We participated in Impact for a long time, and we contributed some of our thinking to it. But people were already well aware of tiled encoding and all the flexibility that was required for this. So and there was a lot of VR stuff going on in Impact. So yes, it's in VVC as well. It's a little harder in AV1 because there's some parameters that you can only set at the global level, whereas in HEVC you can set them at the tile level, which makes it easier to do this in HEVC.
Talk about the standards, the role of standards in this market. Is this if I'm NFL, do I go to one publisher? I don't really care if it works widely, or is there an opportunity to work together with standards that you've done so successfully in the past?
Let me say that everything we do is built on standards. We use standard HEVC encoding. All of our streams are individual decodable. Certainly, if I look at it's a little harder for VR, but if I look at the Multiview stuff, any of these individual feeds are just you'll play in an FF Play or in VLC, no problem. The packaging is standard MP4. We contributed some stuff to MP4 as well to make it efficient. Certainly in the case of VR, but it's all standard MP4. And then all the retrieval is just standard HTTP retrieval byte range requests. So, which is what makes it so scalable, by the way. So I think I said before, we wouldn't be able to build our company if it hadn't been for standards, and notably the HEVC standard being so widely supported in all devices.
What's the commercial side of this? If I'm a publisher, what do I spend money on?
It depends, obviously, but you spend your money on a technology license. You get our cross-platform SDK. You can build your apps around it, and then depending on what you want to do, we will deploy in your cloud account our transcoders. We will use our cloud transcoders, mostly for VR. And for Multiview, we're seeking to cooperate, and we're actually already cooperating with encoding vendors to make their encoders tiling enabled. And there's one is coming. Yeah, again, I can't name names, but it's not like VR encoding is really hard. We want to control it. We want to either do it in our cloud platform, or we want to control what we deploy, for instance, to your AWS account. But for Multiview, it's a lot simpler, and it's easy to enable third-party encoding vendors to make their encoders tiling enabled, and the magic, all of the retrieval magic, all of the sync magic, by the way, because we didn't really touch on it, but it's all frame accurately synced, which we obviously need for VR. So we carry that on for Multiview. Most of our magic is in the client side.
The license, is that going to relate to the number of players? I mean, how is that cost going to scale?
We are too young to give you a standard answer, but in general, we would like to grow with the success of our customer. We seek a minimum level of engagement, because otherwise we can't pay our developers, and then we seek to grow with the success of our customers. And there could be active devices or minutes streamed, or those are some parameters.
So convince me that this is a market that's going to prosper. I mean, Apple's in it, YouTube's in it.
Yeah.
What's Apple? Apple wants to sell hardware, so what has Apple shown us that tells us that this market is going to be quite dynamic going forward?
What Apple and Google are telling us is that this is something that people want. It's clear that especially younger generations have a much more dynamic way of interacting with content, with video, with their fans. People used to be a fan of a sports club. Now they are a fan of a player. They want to follow that player, maybe. So that's changing. So I think it's a really good fit for a more interactive and an immersive way of consuming content. And we're starting to see some real traction for it. So I'm confident it will catch on. And yes, YouTube and Apple are cases in point. They've started to do it, albeit very inflexible and well, may I call it a little bit primitive. We think we have a better solution, obviously, but it's being trialed and it's being used. And interestingly, it's being criticized for its lack of flexibility. I heard Dan Rayburn in a podcast recently saying that about NFL Sunday Ticket, that it only had certain configurations, which was a shame.
Okay, we've got a question in. Now's a good time for it. What are the bandwidth implications of this approach? I mean, how are you sending X times the bits to the viewer, or is it still a 1080p type?
Basically, the bandwidth is the sum of all the videos that you're retrieving, but we're retrieving them at the resolution that they're being displayed. So if you see a thumbnail, it's not being retrieved at HD resolution. If I switched, remember I did the switch between the thumbnail and the main video, it actually switches around what's being retrieved. And we learned how to switch really fast, because we had to do this for VR. If you move your head in VR, you don't want to wait on a high resolution tile for seconds. So we did a lot of switching times optimization. But we actually only retrieve what you see at the resolution that you see it. That's how I usually explain it. So obviously, if I do an HD video and a pip, then it will increase the bandwidth, the pip, but it doesn't increase it unnecessarily. And also our software takes screen sizes, etc., into account, so it doesn't retrieve unnecessarily high resolution content.
It's not X streams times 1080p. It's a little, some multiple of, or some small increment over the 1080p.
Yeah, and then thumbnails are packaged together cleverly. So there's like 4 thumbnails in one small video, in one tile. It's tricks like this that we use to optimize the bandwidth.
What's the typical resolution of the main display? Is this 1080p stuff, or is it mostly 4K at this point?
No, it's 1080p, or maybe even lower if you want 720p. But typically, I think 1080p is a good one.
Question: what about the Apple headset? Is that total VR, or is that Tiledmedia as well? What do you know about that?
I've applied for one for an SDK. The good thing about the Apple, so our stuff works on all Apple platforms. And it also has a standard hardware decoders. Interestingly, it's a collaboration with Unity. All of our headset work relies on Unity. So I think and I hope that we should be able to port our VR stuff to the Apple headset pretty quickly. And the stuff that we did in Beijing, it was our production partner Koenen produced in 8K 180. That's exactly the resolution you need, interestingly, for the Apple headset. It's about 14.5K 360 equivalent. It's interesting. But what Apple also does, if you allow me to say a few more words, is they really have a focus on this multi-view paradigm. If you look at the interface, it's sort of a multi-view paradigm. So I think it fits. It would be an amazing fit. And it would be an amazing experience to watch like a golf tournament or maybe a tennis tournament with all these different matches going on and be able to switch between them, etc. in a headset. You get all these virtual displays right at your disposal.
What's the middle ground? Not the augmented reality, I guess. Where does this fit into that, or are they totally different things?
So we focus on video. There is, if you look at the Apple headset, specifically the Vision Pro, it's also an augmented reality device because you have the see-through thing. You have the environment is there, and so you can just put virtual screens in your environment. It's a good match.
Getting back to the VR market, that's kind of where you started. Is that ever going to happen, and why
Yes.
has it been so slow?
It's a longer cycle than people think. First, headset adoption. Second, doing a good production. Third, making a good user experience. Related to this, having a broad enough audience. It's a virtuous cycle, right? But it's happening only very slowly. Only if there are enough people to go to will it make sense to do a good production. Only if you do a good production will enough people go to the headset and start watching games in VR. And I'm focusing on video, right? So it's a cycle that just takes some time to get launched, but it's happening. And what's encouraging is there's a lot of development in headsets and headset quality. And again, the things that we did, that we enabled, we didn't do them ourselves, but that we enabled with our streaming technology in Beijing, they will look amazing in a Vision Pro because of the higher resolution than the current headsets have. Totally mind-boggling. And if I see how much people already today appreciate what Sky does with its Premier League matches, then I'm convinced that this will fly. And then you add the social bit because you can talk to your friends, you can go to the match, you can talk to your friends who are also in a headset, even if they're remote. I'm convinced that this will fly. It's just we wanted to be deployed faster, so we thought we'd work on Multiview as well before before VR was a big the big hit that it will eventually be.
You tend to talk about sports almost exclusively for both VR
Yeah.
and Multiview. What are the follow-on type of productions that you see as working well with these technologies?
Yeah, sports is probably 1, 2, and 3, but there's also interest in music. No, yeah, that was not even intended. But there's also music. We have one customer looking at Multiview for doing music education, which is really nice. They record an orchestra from different angles, and then people can play along and they can switch views, etc. So that's one. But there's also pop music, and another one is just multi-channel interfaces. Right now, if you have an EPG, it may have pictures. If you're lucky, the pictures are relevant. And if you're very lucky, they're also right in the sense that it's what's actually on TV at that moment. Now, if you make an EPG with Multiview, you will just show what's on the channel now. You can make a grid of your favorite channels. It's completely customizable, by the way. So I think it has an application in EPGs as well. So sports, music, EPGs, and maybe training, maybe another. So just filming things from different angles, being able to switch to have a real close up, but also zoom out. It's also, but sports still, it's 1, 2, 3, not just because that's what people want to interact with. It's also because there's a lot of money being spent on sports.
Is there any magic on the audio side, or is that just simple, like one feed and?
That's another good question. Audio obviously is relatively low bitrate compared to video. We have even in our demo, because we have a demo app, just a Tiledmedia player that people can find in stores. But even in our demo, we have allow options like keep the audio with the main feed while you're switching auxiliary feeds, even if they're large, or keep the audio with what you decide to be the main feed. Or conceivably, you could even mix audio if you like. Say you have a camera on a motorbike and a director cut, you may want to be able to mix the individual audio with the director audio. But it's all doable and supported.
I have a question on AV1. Do you have AV1 ready, or is that another development that has to happen before you can actually deploy that?
No, we don't have it ready. We've looked at it. We think it's probably feasible, but in order for us to deploy it, the only reason would be if HEVC was no longer as widely supported and AV1 was, and I'm not seeing it happen anytime soon.
We've apparently got some people my age in the audience, or maybe a little bit younger, but they're asking about what was the magic bullet that H.264 had, and are we ever going to see that again? So I guess going back to your days with the MPEG forum, what happened to make H.264 such a success?
Well, it started with ITU and ISO coming together and deciding to have one standard, which was end of the 90s? Yes, midway the 90s, because there's been this getting back together, doing the part again, getting back together. H.261, H2, so MPEG-2 and H.262 were separate. No, were the same, and then H.263 and MPEG-4 split off again, and H.264 and MPEG-4 Part 10 came together again. But it started with the world's experts coming together and deciding we will join our forces and we will make the world's best codec. And there was an objective process. This is the best part of standardization, I will say, when people compete and work together and create something that's amazing. And then I had a small role, I would say, when this was all ready. We decided, okay, so MPEG-4 is ready. What are we going to do with it now? We have to set up some sort of an industry forum. It started as the MPEG-4 industry forum that took the standard to the market. And then pretty quickly, we found out that the gating factor would probably be the licensing, because for MPEG-2, it was clear, it was all hardware, there was a royalty per chipset, and but MPEG-4 was all going to be software. And how do you deal with that? So we had a number of workshops with licensees and licensors. And the good thing about that was that from certain companies, there were both licensees and licensors, people that had IP. They could also look at it from the licensee side, because you need to be reasonable. And I think some people at some point got dollar signs in their eyes. But at that point, we were able to have a number of workshops to discuss the issues. It was not easy, because if you start to discuss IP, you get into antitrust issues, etc. So we had lawyers involved, etc. But we managed to do that, and out of that, we let it go. It became licensable, basically. AVC became, and this was a process that took many more years, by the way. And I think what also helped, and stop me if I'm going too long, John, but what also helped was that Microsoft and then SMPTE published this VC9 codec, and then VC1. And I think it put some pressure on the AVC licensors to get their act together. There was real competition.
Interesting. So the fact that there were alternatives that I guess in retrospect, they never had a chance of succeeding, because it was never going to succeed on the broadcast side, but that pushed the technology owners to come up with they went, I guess the royalty for MPEG-2 was like $2.50, and it was down to 20 cents for H.264. And I guess you're telling me that the justification for that was you could do it in software. So, instead of just TV encoders and TV decoders, we're looking at every browser and every mobile device. Of course, mobile devices didn't exist when H.264 came out.
No, we were working on them. We had these projects. We had a dream of mobile audiovisual terminals. Dick Tracy watches. They exist now, but yes. And now I feel old.
You mentioned that standards, that was the great thing about standards. I mean, the negative everybody points to with standards is the royalty side. Do you see that as a hindrance to, future generations of technology, or do you see that, as just kind of the how to pay for all the innovation that you're getting the benefit of?
I see it as a fact of life, and nothing comes for free. And as long as it's reasonable, nobody will complain.
HEVC has gotten a lot of bad press, and certainly a lot of it was, well deserved at the start. But as you mentioned, it is incredibly widely deployed at this time, which is why you have a technology.
And it's now also in browsers, so for all intents and purposes, it's almost universally deployed right now. For all the bad press, which I think is a bit overrated.
Well, listen, we're out of questions and we're out of time. Rob, I appreciate you making time for this. Tell us about what you're going to be showing at IBC and where people can find you.
They can contact me. We don't have a booth, so I'm going to be roaming the halls and doing lots of meetings, but I'll be showing what I showed just now with a few more interaction modes, and I'll be telling about how this can revolutionize streaming and make it just a lot more engaging and scalable.
Okay. I should say that NETINT also has a booth at IBC, and if you go to our homepage, netint.com, you'll be able to, we'll have a pop-up that shows you where that booth is and how to get in touch with our people there. Rob, again, have a great show, and thanks for taking the time today.
Thank you, John. It's been a real pleasure. Thanks for the insightful questions.